Final seconds of the game, a chance to score, and the chance has gone begging. If your business's commerce platform keeps missing the target on golden opportunities, get the MVP you deserve. Get Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide. Whether you're a garage entrepreneur or IPO ready, Shopify is the only tool that you need to start, run, and grow your business without the struggle. Shopify puts you in control of every sales channel. So whether you're selling signed football boots from Shopify's in-person POS system, or you're vending vintage shirts on Shopify's all-in-one e-commerce platform, you are covered. And once you've reached your audience, Shopify has the internet's best converting checkout to help you turn them from browsers to buyers. What I love about Shopify is how, no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US. And Shopify is truly a global force, powering Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across over 170 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. This is Possibility, powered by Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ranks, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ranks to take your business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/ranks.
Dougie.
Sam.
We have picked a whopper of a subject for our maiden voyage here on this podcast. It is Chelsea's transfer window.
It does feel a little bit chaotic. In total, spending $219.6 million.
Their squad, 191 years in them all. Is this just good business?
Philip Jorgensen is coming to Chelsea. That's a 22-year-old goalkeeper.
Jadon Sancho is now a Chelsea player.
Chelsea have agreed a £54 million deal with Wolves to sign Pedro Neto.
We are now a club whose only strategy appears to be to stockpile youngsters from around the world and fund it through selling academy players. Chelsea have just got to stop buying players.
Yes, hello everybody and welcome to the very first episode of The Truth. I, Sam Tighe, am joined by Dougie Critchley.
Hello.
And the voice of God producer, Jack Collins.
Hello, Sam.
To wade through one of the most polarising subjects in football right now, it is Chelsea's transfer business. Dougie, we have seen a lot of noise around this. We have seen a lot of confusion. Quite a lot of laughter as well. Mm-hmm. Images of 45-man squads floating around on social, a double-digit bomb squad, 7-year contracts for just about everybody, and it feels like it's split a fan base almost in two.
Yeah, absolutely. I think particularly online, you see a lot of defence of Clearlake Capital and their business strategy since taking over. They're now in their third season. They've gone 12th, 6th. It feels like this year has to see a marked improvement. It felt like maybe this summer they would tone it down in terms of the amount of signings brought in. They didn't do that at all.
They did not do that at all. So I think it was 12, 11 and a loan for Jadon Sancho, but given that's an obligation, let's call that 12.
That's 12, yeah.
It was 12 the season before and it was 15 the season before that. So that's quite a lot of new faces, and mixed in amongst that as well, deals for Willian Esteval, who will join next year, and a deal for Kendry Paez as well, neither of those players can join until they are 18 years of age, so they're still in South America. This is a lot of players. Like, this is 5 transfer windows, and this is like 50 odd players. So I think where we need to start here, and we will get onto, and the main crux of this is this summer's business, how they've treated the players, what they've brought in, and what's the process. But we need to really just list off what the strategy is, because I think some people are still trying to figure this out. But I think I know what they're doing. So
go for it.
I'm going to do my very best here. I'd say give me a timer of 1 minute, but don't, because it might take me a little bit longer. 15 permanent signings when they took over the summer of 2022. They start the summer with Raheem Sterling, just under 50 million, and they close it with Aubameyang for just over 10. Do you remember when Aubameyang played for Chelsea?
Very, very vaguely.
It feels like a fever dream, that one. And then obviously over the course of the winter period in that season, a ridiculous amount of money is spent. They buy Mudryk for like 60 million plus. They buy Enzo Fernandez for a British record 105, 106 million. They go through 3 managers, and then the following summer they appoint Pochettino, sign 12 more players. Several of them missed basically the entire campaign due to injury, like Nkunku and like Romeo Lavia. That's 120 million for the pair. Barely kicked a ball for them. It's terrible luck, to be fair. They also break the record again for Moises Caicedo, and they do strike gold with Cole Palmer, at least. There were some good ones. This summer again, 12 permanent signings, if you include Sancho. The highest fee, though, is capped at 50 million. So no more dancing around in the 100 million bracket. That was for Pedro Neto. So I'm going to take a little breather here, and I'm going to ask you a question I think I already know the answer to. What is the common theme running through this business?
Well, it's clear that they are signing young players. That is the easy thing to identify. They are signing young players to either go into their starting 11 and hopefully develop and potentially sell for a profit, but they do want to win trophies with those young players all developing at the same time, hopefully all peaking at the same time across the length of these contracts as well. You know, I was looking at the contract lengths in this squad. There's only 4 players whose contracts expire before the summer of 2028. They are Jadon Sancho, who's obviously on loan, who will be signed permanently next summer, Bergstrom, Bettinelli, 2 goalkeepers, and Ben Chilwell, who they want to get rid of. So in the next 4 summers, that is the only change unless players are sold. So they have built for the long term. You know, the longest contract that goes on is Cole Palmer in 2033. So in 9 years' time.
I think Nicholas Jackson just got his extension to that date too.
Okay, he might be joining him there. Enzo Fernandez, 2032 as well. But it's clear that, you know, they are a very young side, to say the least. Their average age this season is 23.1. There's only one side in English football's top 2 divisions with a younger average age, and that's my club, Sunderland. Amazing that I managed to get Sunderland into a new podcast this early doors. But it's clear that the strategy hasn't worked so far. I think that is fair to say. You know, they finished in the top 4 for 4 consecutive seasons prior to the takeover. Of the 20 previous seasons prior to the takeover, they only finished outside of it 3 times. They finished 12th and 6th. So now they need to see a return on this crazy, huge investment.
So 15, then 12 signings over the course of 3 years. The ownership were very clear. They said, judge us in a couple of years, judge us after 4 or 5 windows. We have now reached that point. So it's the perfect time to have that discussion. Just before we go into the cost of this strategy and the chess pieces that they're moving around, because we don't have a definitive answer to this, but we all have our opinion. How much influence do you think the manager, the head coach of Chelsea, has in all of this business?
It's a good question. It's a very good question. I would suggest that when they got rid of Pochettino, well, it was by mutual consent, wasn't it? And assigned Enzo Maresca as head coach, that was a clear sign that he was going to have very little to do with the transfer strategy. I think their fingers were almost burnt in their first summer of taking over, where they hadn't got their structure in place, and Thomas Tuchel seemed to have a unusually huge say in who was signed and when. You know, he was the guy that was really behind Raheem Sterling. I'm pretty sure he was a big fan of Koulibaly as well. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he would have, you know, really been up for, you know, disbanding the squad that won the Champions League under him in 2021 so quickly as well. So there was clearly a lot of issues between Tuchel and that board. He was fired, I think, 6 games into his first season, eventually led to Potter, etc. And we know what happened next. But since then, they have basically hired, you know, men whose job it is to improve the squad through their work on the training ground, but have very little say in transfer dealings.
It does feel like they give the manager one, though, doesn't it? So I don't think the manager in question or the head coach in question nowadays at Chelsea, I think they go in with their eyes open. Maresca, if he wasn't going in with his eyes open here, then what was he looking at? Yeah. Pochettino, I think, can be forgiven slightly for maybe thinking having a bit more of a brief, a bit more of influence over it all. But I think Pochettino was given Disassi. Disassi felt like a Pochettino centre-back, but it was only in the wake of Wesley Fofana's very unfortunate injury, which knocked him out for the entire campaign. And I think we know that Enzo Maresca was given Kiernan Dewsbury Hall.
His man.
Like, that was it's like, look, we're going to do all the transfers, Enzo, but you can have one. Who do you want? And he goes, oh, well, I want Kiernan. I want Kiernan straight up. Absolutely. And in effect, they've kind of swapped him for Conor Gallagher, who Pochettino appeared to fight tooth and nail to keep and left the club, as did Conor Gallagher. And Maresca's obviously had to deliver the news that Ben Chilwell, Raheem Sterling, Trevor Chalobah, a couple of others, they're not wanted by the club. Now, 2 of those left, and Chilwell has basically been left stranded. But there is a cost of this strategy. So if we agree that signing young players is good, locking up exceptional young players on long-term deals It's good in principle. Can you fund 50 odd signings in 3 years without having to make sales? Nah. And the best way to make money is to sell the homegrown players. So, little list of players that they have sold in the last 5 windows. Gilmore, 10 million. Loftus-Cheek, 15. Mount, 55. Hudson-Odoi, 5. Ian Matson, 37.5. Omari Hutchinson, 20 million. Lewis Hall, 28. Conor Gallagher, 36. All pure profit. Great for balancing the books and great for feeding that transfer addiction that they seem to have. But this has created the friction. And I think this has reached a boiling point this summer with the treatment of Trevor Chalobah and the treatment of Conor Gallagher, right?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think, I was speaking to Rory Jennings last week, a very prominent Chelsea fan, and he doesn't speak for all of them, but he was sort of outlining how disappointed a lot of Chelsea fans are with their treatment of homegrown players. It was only a few years ago that on the back of a transfer ban that they hired Frank Lampard as manager and brought through Tammy Abraham, Mason Mount, Fikayo Tomori that season. Yep. Yeah, they didn't win any, substantial silverware, but there was a sign that, for so long, Chelsea's academy in Cobham was really coming to save the club in a really difficult situation with that transfer ban. A lot of those players then went on under Thomas Tuchel with, some other key additions that they'd brought in over previous years, like Kante and Kovacic, Kai Havertz, sprinkling of quality all over the pitch to win the Champions League. And since then, aside from a few finals, it's been hugely disappointing for Chelsea. So I think a lot of Chelsea fans, would struggle to accept the loss of identity in their club and would be more happy to deal with it if they were seeing clear signs of progression. And you spend this amount of money, you create a certain amount of noise around the club. I get criticised online for talking about Chelsea too much, but it's impossible not to talk about Chelsea. You're watching a club pursue a strategy that no one in the history of the league has ever done. I think in football, very few clubs, maybe outside of Serie A, have ever signed so many players in such a short amount of time. It's a unique strategy, and so far it hasn't worked out. And I think they are creating a rod for their own back, because in a few years' time, there are very few homegrown players that are going to get the game time that they need to get to command a profit that is going to make this strategy feasible. I mean, say if Reece James has another injury-hit season this year, do they consider selling Reece James? Do they, there's not that many left now. So it just feels like we are coming towards the boiling point of this strategy. So this season has to be the payoff.
Right. Agreed. And yeah, I mean, maybe they'll just do that thing that a lot of clubs are doing at the moment where they seem to be signing each other's academy players at 17 for a nominal fee.
End of June deals. Even at earlier stage than that.
So not like Omari Kellerman to Chelsea, for example, or Matson to Aston Villa, but like Omari Hutchinson, for example, was in Arsenal's academy and was signed by Chelsea a couple of years ago, and then goes through and plays a couple of years at the club in the academy, goes through as homegrown, and because he was signed for a nominal or free fee, and then it joins Ipswich for 20 million. There's your pure profit. So it's not that they have to be at Cobham from age 7 and bleed blue when they're cut for them to count as homegrown profit. Like, they probably can still find ways to generate that money. The question, of course, is it worth it, and what is it funding? So at the moment, it's funding 12 to 15 players a year, all in a 17 to 21 age bracket from all sorts of different places. Feels very clear that Chelsea want to be the first team on everybody's lips when it comes to where's the best place to go if you're a kid from South America. They want to be right at the front of the queue for the next best talent from that area, in a way that maybe like Real Madrid have been in Brazil for the last 5 or 6 years, scooping up Vinicius Jr. and then following up with Rodrigo. They want to be that team right at the front of the queue. They want their footprint right there. Again, it's, as a strategy, I can't really fault it on its own. But you can't just talk about the strategy in that sense, because the cost is the homegrown players. Now, this is where some Chelsea fans and some neutrals, they admire the strategy and they defend it and they think it's fine. And they say, well, you have to sell homegrown players because you're incentivized to do so. And Chelsea aren't the only team to have done this. Like, Aston Villa have just done it. Everton have just done it. Man United have just done it with Scott McTominay. And Erik ten Hag has sat there and gone, well, we didn't really have a choice because we sort of needed the money. But there's still a choice, isn't there? Because you wouldn't have to sell all of your homegrown players if you insisted on signing 12 to 15 players per summer. And maybe it starts to slow down. Maybe they think somewhere in amongst these 50 players, we're going to hit gold 5 times. We've got the makings of a mega squad.
Yeah, I can see the logic, but the reason that Vinicius Jr. and Rodrigo have worked out the way they have is because they were given time, they were given patience, they have, worked under a very select few managers, and even at points when Vinicius Jr. and Rodrigo, to a lesser extent, but Vinicius Jr. had quite a difficult time when he first arrived. Yep. He was given a lot of criticism, and now he is amongst, if not the best player in the world for last season, and one of the favourites for the Ballon d'Or. But how do you expect all these young players to become Vinicius Jr. or Vinicius Jr.-esque players, or to increase in value by threefold if they aren't given the game time and the patience? So that's where it just feels like, yes, it's all well and good signing these young players, but the actual basis of their development, of time, investment, and having the right manager to lead them just feels like they're not patient enough with the rest of the system and signing too many players around it. Mm-hmm. And we'll get onto it this summer.
And and appointing too many managers as well. So too many instances of complete upheaval, going from Potter back into Lampard, and then through into the net into Pochettino, and then let's go for Enzo Maresca. Like, getting through 5 managers, it's pretty difficult. I know it's Chelsea, but it's still pretty difficult to do. And it doesn't really platform any of the players because you constantly feel like you're starting from scratch. My assessment of their decision to move on from Pochettino at the end of last season as a Villa fan was, phew.
Yeah.
Because I was really worried that Chelsea were finding it. The amount of goals they scored at the end of last season, it really clicked for them. And I thought, oh, geez, Villa are up against it here to hold on to, to retain a top 4 spot. The last thing they need is Chelsea roaring back. And then they destroyed all of that momentum and progress and went with Enzo Maresca and signed a bunch more players. So it's an interesting strategy, and they probably need a bit more stability, not just from a playing perspective here in terms of transfer market signings, but from a managerial perspective as well. They keep giving out these long deals. They keep being convinced that they've got the right guy. Eventually, they will get there, right?
Well, you'd have thought so, but I completely agree with you about the Pochettino decision. They finished 6 places higher up with 19 more points than the previous year. Look, the previous year was their worst in Premier League, well, at least this century. A long, long time. It was a terrible, terrible year. But they lost one of their final 15 games. They won 9. They won all of their final 5 games to finish 6th. The only teams that took more than their 32 points in their final 15 games was Arsenal and Man City. Only those 2 sides had a better goal difference in that period as well. It felt like they were on the right path. And look, it's maybe a slight hot take, but I didn't think last year's Premier League was particularly strong, to be totally honest. The sides that finished 4th, 5th and 6th all conceded over 60 league goals. The year before, the 4th, 5th and 6th sides conceded 33, 47 and 53. Only 4 sides, City, Arsenal, Liverpool and randomly Everton, conceded fewer than 58. The year before, 13 teams did. So,
sorry, Everton are in there.
I know.
Is that what the hell is a polar bear doing in Arlington, Texas meme?
But it just shows like last year was crazy for goals. I think it was a Premier League record for goals, no one was defending particularly effectively. And I think that was Pochettino's main criticism from the fan base. Like, the attack did click at different points last year. It was helped by Cole Palmer having the season of his life. Maybe he will continue that this year. It looks he certainly got off to a great start. But their defence and their structure was a little flawed in points, and I think they wanted to make a change on the basis of that.
For sure. Right, speaking of all this upheaval, got a bunch of players to discuss because we are going to zone in on this summer's work. I am going to throw some names at you that Chelsea have signed this summer, and I want your quick fire takes on each. If you're not sure, don't be shy. Just ask producer Jack. He knows everything,
I'll
okay?
always be honest.
Let's start with Tosin.
While this feels, a bit unnecessary for a Sunderland fan to take this over a Fulham fan and producer Jack. So
he doesn't want to talk about Tosin.
Sure, we'll get his thoughts in just a second. But look, he's played regularly for 6 seasons, 3 in the Championship, 3 in the Premier League. I think last year was the first where he struggled a bit with injury. The thing that with Tosin is he's 26 years old. He's a slightly different age range to a lot of their signings in recent years. He's not necessarily going to get a whole lot better than he is at the moment. I think he's a very solid Premier League centre-back. Do I see him winning titles, being a key member of Chelsea's squad going forward? No.
But a nice homegrown signing for free, huh?
Yeah, I mean, my kind of thoughts on Tosin, and I've sort of said this all summer, is that I think he is a perfectly capable centre-back and was a perfectly capable centre-back for Fulham in a mid-table Premier League club. I've not seen anything that would suggest to me that actually you're looking at that as a player that could have made loads of heaps. There might be a little bit left improvement, and obviously he was part of City's academy, and there are people there, Maresca in particular, but also backroom staff that have worked with that before. But I think he is a capable player, just not one that I think is going to set anything on fire. So can he be a backup? Yeah, for this Chelsea team? Yeah, absolutely fine. But he's got a mistake in him every game. It was a free, but also the wages that he's been put on there are pretty staggering, I think, for a player of Tosin's ability and quality.
But he does post his own highlight compilations on social media.
Does he?
So it's an A+ signing from me. Okay, Kiernan Dewsbury Hall.
I like Kiernan Dewsbury Hall. I thought he had an exceptional year last year in the Championship, of course, but his Premier League record is very average.
Best player in the Championship last season?
I would say so. Yeah, I think there's only 4 players that contributed more goals. I love his calmness on the ball. I love the fact he's able to make great decisions running at high speeds. He's got a really nice weight of pass. Is he going to be better than Gallagher last year, which I'm sure we'll come on to? That's where I think he might slightly fall down. But £30 million, I don't think it's a disaster of a move. Important when a new manager with a very set system joins a new club. Helpful to have a sort of ally there.
The Maurizio Sarri, Jorginho double.
Yeah.
Chelsea have done this before. What about Renato Vega?
I don't know a lot about Renato Vega.
Yeah. Producer Jack, do you know much about Renato Vega?
He's looked quite sharp in his sort of vague appearances so far. I wasn't wildly aware of what he was doing before he joined Chelsea, but everything that we've seen from him so far has been pretty impressive, and to have shifted Ben Chilwell out of the rotation completely and kind of retain that faith from the manager, I mean, this one seems like a pretty good gamble from my perspective.
Yeah, 14 million isn't very much unpolished potential as well. Plays left back, centre back and DM, so you just assume he can invert, and that's kind of all Maresca really wants, right?
He's a unit as well.
Yes, he is. All right, Philip Jurgensen, goalkeeper.
This I think was really random. I mean, Chelsea and their goalkeepers is an on-running saga. They've spent £70 million on 4 goalkeepers in the last 3 windows. And I don't think any of them would be considered in the top 10 in the Premier League, let alone in Europe. It just feels like they probably should have spent £50 million of that £70 million on one elite goalkeeper. Look, Philip Jorgensen had 1 season regularly of playing regular football at Villarreal. He had a pretty solid save percentage, but he was under his post-shot XG, so he conceded more goals than XG suggests he should have. 24.5 million euros. I thought he was going to probably replace Sanchez, but it looks like he's only going to be used in the Conference League. This one confuses me.
Yeah, Maresca has said that for now, Sanchez plays in the Premier League, Jurgensen plays midweeks, and he has allowed room for that to change based on performances, but for now, that's how he's going to split it. I mean, look, having goalkeepers share those responsibilities, it's not exactly new. Spending 20 million on Jurgensen just to play in the Europa League, maybe not that necessary.
Could they not have just bought Mamardashvili? Like, is this not the move that they should have made a year ago? And, seeing what he's done, and this is it. And Dukes makes a really good point there about the fact that Villarreal, and good season for Jorgensen, 100%, but only really when Marcelino came in and turned them round from conceding week in, week out to actually having a somewhat stable defensive unit, which we haven't seen loads of from Chelsea's perspective so far. Like, it feels like an extraordinary gamble to have spent this much money without buying, what would it have taken to get Mike Mignon out of Milan, right? And could they have done that with the £70 million they have spent on goalkeepers? I think the answer is probably yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make a very good point about Mamardashvili. It felt so painfully obvious all summer. I can't remember how many times I tweeted it, but numerous times. But every Chelsea fan would just reply being like, he's not good enough with his feet. And then who goes and buys him? Liverpool for next year. A club that are trying to replace Alisson, one of the best, probably the best goalkeeper in the last 10, 15 years in the Premier League. So I feel like that's a complete missed opportunity.
I mean, look, this is not a podcast about Liverpool or Mamardashvili, but I agree that he is not the best with his feet, but he is a young goalkeeper. So, and by the way, 25 million for him is a steal. Oh my God, what happened? Valencia, what happened? Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to go straight to producer Jack for this one. Caleb Wiley, because he plays for one of the 18,000 clubs that Jack supports.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, this one is another one which is just a kind of low-cost, high-potential upside signing. Caleb Wiley exploded onto the scene for Atlanta when he was like 17. He's played like 80 games before the age of 20. But I'm not convinced, one, that he fits what Maresca wants to do, because if you were going to compare him to anyone in this Chelsea squad, it would be Ben Chilwell. And more importantly, he's kind of not great at anything yet. He's young and he's developing, and he's, I think he's on a path to being quite a good player. And I think they've probably gambled on the idea that if he does work out for Strasbourg, they will have got someone very cheap who can kind of come in straight away. But he's a very different type of centre of left back to the likes of Renato Vega and to Marc Cucurella. He loves getting forward. He loves bombing down. There were Alphonso Davies comparisons early on in his career. So maybe it's one for the future. And again, low cost, potential high upside. But I don't see how he fits into this squad in the immediate future if Maresca sticks around.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just because he doesn't suit Maresca now doesn't mean Maresca's going to be around in the next couple of years. Anyway, you never know with this sort of stuff, do you? Mark Guiu, 5 million, opportunistic release clause.
Yeah, I think he's fine as a backup. He's looked reasonably sharp so far. He missed a huge opportunity, and I think it was the first leg of their game against Servette. But yeah, you want to give him a chance. I think he did okay at Barcelona in very limited minutes. It was super cheap.
It's a big lad, isn't he?
Huge, massive.
He's a big lad. Right, Pedro Neto. I'm going to take this one.
Go for it.
He's awesome. I absolutely love Pedro Neto, and 50 million is a very fair price for him if it's the biggest if of all time. If you can stay on the pitch.
Yes.
So many injuries, Pedro Neto. Like, why was he at Wolves for this long? Injuries. He's missing double-digit games every year for the last 3 years. It's like, well, he missed an entire year, and then off the back of that, sort of 15. He hasn't been able to stay on the pitch. And this is a big gamble. Generally speaking, teams don't like to spend this much money on injury-prone players. And I think we have to say that Pedro Neto is an injury-prone player. There's kind of no getting around that. Right, Joao Felix. Late one.
Yeah. Just quickly on Pedro Neto. In the last 3 completed seasons, Pedro Neto played fewer minutes for Wolves than Conor Gallagher managed for Chelsea last season alone.
What?
Yeah.
That is a stunning statistic.
I say it again. Played
Horrendous.
fewer minutes in the last 3 completed seasons for Wolves than Conor Gallagher did last season alone for Chelsea. But let's move on from that bombshell to Joao Felix. £45 million signing from Atletico Madrid. I find this one a little bit strange, given the fact he was on loan there the year before last in the back half of the season. I actually think he got an unnecessary amount of stick during that time.
Agreed.
It's all because he couldn't finish his shot. But
he hit the post like 40 times.
Yeah, he was like so close to 3 goal of the season contenders, but it hit the post.
Yes. But only, I mean, people just love looking at stats. He didn't get an assist in 20 games. He scored 4 goals, but there was so much talent there. Mm-hmm. The thing with Joao Felix is he's never scored more than 8 goals in a top 5 league. He's only started more than 18 league games in a top 5 league once since joining Atleti, and that was his first season there. But having said that, I actually thought he looked pretty bright in sort of not a key role at Barcelona last season. It's a strange one, given how long they waited to do this one in the summer, but I don't think it's a disaster. He's obviously insanely talented. I find him very frustrating, but there's so much potential there that it was probably worth the risk.
Yeah, I think the analysis of this transfer is not just about Joao Felix, is it? It's not about whether or not you think Joao Felix is a good player. It's not about whether you think Chelsea should sign him on merit. It's about the fact that what appears to have happened is that Chelsea tried to sign an Atletico Madrid player by the name of Samu Omarodian in order to facilitate Conor Gallagher going to Atletico Madrid. The Samu Omarodian deal fell apart, and in response to that, seemingly to ensure that Conor Gallagher moved to Atletico Madrid, probably because they needed the money from the homegrown sale, they signed a different Atletico Madrid player who plays a different position. And that is, I think this is the move over the summer that really got people heated. I think it really moved the needle on the discussion as to what Chelsea are doing and what they're doing to accomplish their strategy, their intentions. I've got to say this one really annoyed me, and it's nothing to do with Felix. It's to do with the concept of we'll sign anybody to ensure that Gallagher goes. That hurts. Gallagher captained the club more than 20 times last season. Like that is, along with Trevor Chalobah being left off the plane for the pre-season tour. Like these are the moves here. It's got ever so slightly more sinister this summer than it was in summers past. We've got one more, and it's Jadon Sancho, the deadline day move. The more the details came out about this, the more I thought this is a great deal for Chelsea in isolation. Like, if you judge it in a vacuum, it's a loan with an obligation. So that means the transfer fee is basically pushed into next financial year. They clearly had no room for that this year. And the reported fee seems to be 25 million or slightly less. I mean, would you pay 25 million for Jadon Sancho? I would.
Yeah. No, I think I would, but do they need him at all? Like, I was quite confused by this one. I didn't think they needed him at all. Like, they've got Madueke, they've got Pedro Neto, they've got Christopher Nkunku that can play wide.
Mudryk.
They've still got Mudryk, who they're not going to be able to shift.
Palmer can play there.
Felix it just didn't feel like a necessity. And supposedly they are paying the large majority of his £250,000 per week wages. So for Man United, that could be up to, say they're paying 80% of that. They could save Man United £10 million annually. Anyway, enough about Man United's finances, but you can kind of see why Man United, if Sancho wasn't going to pay regularly, were like, well, we'll save £10 million on him and have a guaranteed £20 to £25 million coming in next summer. And also because according to, the financial fair play amortization of Sancho's fee remaining is about £14 million for United to pay. And Chelsea are guaranteeing them a profit on top of that. So I think it's a great deal for Man United financially. There is obviously, even at the spell at Dortmund last year, who I think he was maybe slightly overhyped in terms of his impact at Dortmund. He did have an amazing game in a Champions League semi-final first leg, which obviously moves everyone's needle and changes everyone's opinion, especially if you're not watching Dortmund in the Bundesliga on a weekly basis. He completed 12 dribbles in a game versus PSG. That's absolutely ridiculous. Like, it was the most since Messi against Man United in 2008. But it wasn't the Sancho of old suddenly returning at Dortmund. And he's had another summer and another start to the season where he hasn't played regularly at United. And there is a lot to recover.
Squad, has he?
No, there's a lot to recover there in terms of his lack of football at United. He's never scored more than 6 league goals in a season for United. He's never provided more than 3 league assists in a season for United. He was just quite poor for Man United and then had that huge falling out with Erik ten Hag, which is so much publicised. So
they've chosen Erik ten Hag over Sancho here.
Yeah.
I mean, they've set their stall out.
He could, if he gets back to pre-first Dortmund, level player, he was absolutely phenomenal there. People were rightly comparing him to Mbappe. Obviously, Mbappe was way ahead of him even at that time, but he was not far behind. He was in that bracket just below him. So I hope he gets back to it, but I just see another spell at Chelsea where he's not going to be a guaranteed starter. Yes, he's back in London, but is he going to be able to fix his off-the-pitch issues? I'm not sure.
Yeah, we'll see. Okay, we've got a couple more. Aaron Anselmino, who doesn't join yet, or at least has gone back on loan and will join later, and Mike Penders, who I still haven't figured out if he joined yet or if he's gone back on loan. No, producer Jack is shaking his head. That means he's joining next summer.
He's gone back on. He's going for a while back to Ghent. So,
but he's not gone back on loan. He's signing next summer, right?
I'm not quite sure how it's working.
Because Chelsea have to be careful here because you can only have so many players out on loan that aren't homegrown, and they have a certain amount of slots. So they had to figure out whether or not they could sign Mike Penders, another goalkeeper, now, or they had to sign him later. So we'll see. Speaking of Penders and speaking of goalkeepers, this is the thing. You can sit there and say, well, Philip Jurgensen, okay, potentially a good player. Okay, Mike Penders, potentially a great goalkeeper, we'll see. But Robert Sanchez, Marcus Bettinelli, Georgi Petrovic, Lucas Bergstrom and Gabriel Slonina are already there. They have 7 goalkeepers, 7 senior goalkeepers on the books. They have, depending on your categorization, somewhere between 5 and 7 wingers on the books. Do you need 5 to 7 wingers? Do you need Madueke, Neto, Mudryk, Sancho, Felix and Nkunku? Palmer can play there. Kellyman exists. Sterling is only temporarily gone. And why, when they gave Trevor Chalobah that 7-year deal as one of their first moves of the new era and told everyone in a statement on the website, we're really looking forward to seeing Trevor grow with the club and for him to contribute in the future, why have they since signed 5 more centre-backs? So this is the thing, like, you can go through all those players as we have done and you can analyse them individually, but transfer market evaluation cannot exist in a vacuum. You have to take in the overall context and look at the backdrop. And I guess I end up with the question, Dougie, is this necessary? Is any of this necessary?
It didn't feel necessary. I have talked already about it, but they took over a side that was used to qualifying for the top 4 in the Premier League, that was used to reaching major finals in England, that would occasionally reach European finals as well. And they ripped up a squad that, yes, probably overachieved in winning the Champions League in 2021. I don't think anyone suggests they were close to being the best side in Europe that year, but they still deserved to beat Man City on the day. Fair play to them. And since, it's just been pure chaos. And I think I looked through it earlier. The signings that you could say have been an absolute success, I think, are Cole Palmer and Malo Gusto, and maybe Nicholas Jackson. I don't think some people wouldn't argue he's an absolute success.
That's divisive. But
Other than that,
but Palmer and Gusto are locked in.
I don't think you can say anyone else is an unqualified success. And you look at some of the transfer fees and some of the players they brought in, like Mudryk, Raheem Sterling's now been replaced already. Koulibaly was signed for significant money. I feel sorry for Fofana given his injury record, but Badia Shield, Disasi haven't worked out. Were they bad players at Monaco? No. But have they been given enough time? Has the system been right? Has the managerial turnover worked for them? No. And then the big one, which I think will become the story, arguably, of Chelsea's season, it feels like we're at a real tipping point with this, is Enzo Fernandez.
Yeah. And, well, to be honest, and Caicedo. Just when you cost that much money, you carry an expectation. Those price tags weigh very, very heavy. And Enzo got off to the worst possible start this summer. And Chelsea, I'm actually pretty stunned at how well Chelsea have played and started the season in terms of a playing sense. I thought they'd be so much worse. I thought the Enzo Fernandez situation would derail them even further than Enzo Maresca's tactics and the adaptation towards those tactics. Maybe the fact that they got Man City first was a blessing in disguise, because they knew that they needed to behave themselves at the back, and they weren't able to take perhaps the risks that they would have done had it been just about anybody else, and it set them off on quite a nice track. But I'm pleasantly surprised at how well they've played in these opening games, because I really thought they would start very, very slowly indeed. I have a couple more questions for you, Dougie, on this. You've referenced how young these players are. There are 5 26-year-olds in this first team squad, and that's it in terms of experience. There is no one older than 26 in this team. Tosin, Cucurella, and Nkunku, Disasi, and Robert Sanchez are 26. And then your sort of key player contingent, what you're building around, which Enzo, Jackson, Palmer, Caicedo, they're in the 22 to 23 range. It's a very young team. Is this team too young to win anything in the next couple of years? Is this the right age profile for a squad gunning for glory?
I think it's probably too young to win anything in the next 2 years. Yeah, I think it probably is. You look at the departure of Thiago Silva. Look, he didn't have his best season last year. He was clearly in decline. But I think the way that other Premier League strikers, I watched Ollie Watkins talk about him last week in an interview, talk about how difficult it was to face Thiago Silva. I think he was still such a magnificent leader in that squad. That's a big departure. Raheem Sterling, that's another big player with a huge reputation, a lot of experience, departing. The other players that they've signed, they did get their fingers burnt slightly with some of the older players that they've signed, like Koulibaly or Aubameyang not working out at all. You can see why they've tried to do it, but I find it very, very difficult to imagine a squad of this size functioning effectively and with this amount of turnover every single year. Because you look at some top players that have joined the Premier League at various points, De Bruyne, Salah in the last 10, 12 years, they didn't necessarily fire immediately. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes a manager, really understanding them better than the previous one. I mean, in Salah and De Bruyne's case, it took them leaving the league and coming back, which I'm not suggesting is the strategy to pursue for Chelsea. But it just feels like there is effectively a bomb arriving at Chelsea soon. I can't work out how it is financially viable if they remain outside of the Champions League. And even then, I still think it's incredibly difficult to see it working. So if I was a Chelsea fan, I'd be very worried. And how do you feel about these 7-year deals? Because there's arguments for and against these, right? The argument for is, well, because it's a 7-year deal, the wage is lower. So obviously, it's the amount of money you are promised is still the same amount of money because it's over a longer period. And that keeps the wage bill, they say, intact. In fact, Chelsea are suggesting that they've managed to cut their wage bill by 50% while the new ownership have been in charge, which as a headline figure is really, really good. They've done it by promising money over much longer periods of time. There's obvious risks with this though, right? Absolutely. What happens if Mikhailo Mudryk, whose contract runs until 2030, still doesn't improve? What happens if one of these players breaks their leg or never gets the game time that they, doesn't work out as a signing? Because I think the key bit about transfer business, and you see this with every club, is that it's impossible to perfectly predict how a signing is going to work out. You might think how they're going to fit into a system, but you might be 90% sure that they're going to be a good fit in the system. You might be 90% sure that they're going to be a good teammate with their teammates. You might be 90% sure that their family's going to adapt to the area. All the off the pitch things that we never really talk about because we don't have any information about. There's just no guarantee that signings are ever going to work out. And when you sign this amount of players in this quantity that are all joining at the same time, trying to find their way in a team under yet another new manager, I think the chances of the signings working out are even less. And you look at, we talked through some of the players that they've signed. Was Enzo Fernandez a bad player before he joined? No. Was Mikhailo Mudryk, who's very raw, but not particularly, Badia Shields, Asasi? No.
Koulibaly was great.
Koulibaly was great. Caicedo
should have gone better.
Everyone was talking about Caicedo as the next big thing in a top 6 club. And why have these players not worked out? I think there's just been too many players signed. I think it's almost impossible for them to fulfill their potential with this amount of turnover.
I've got 2 defences of Chelsea in this point I wasn't going to bring up. But one, I think Moises Caicedo is doing absolutely fine. I think
in pockets, I think he's been fantastic.
I think he's been excellent at points and pretty steady even when he hasn't been excellent. And
that's very last bit of the season when Enzo was actually out with an injury.
Yeah.
Caicedo was unreal.
Yeah.
I think Dougie's right about there being a potential, bombshell coming with Enzo Fernandez, because I think we've seen with Romeo Lavia coming in the first couple of games that he looks excellent, and now Chelsea have kind of set their stall by the fact that Enzo Fernandez has been made captain, and that's a potential problem waiting to happen. Not that I think Enzo's been particularly poor, but I think that there might be a point where you go, actually, is our best midfield combination Caicedo and Lavia, and then where does that leave
Palmer
Enzo?
is the 10,
because he's definitely not a 10, right? Yeah. But just on the wages, because I think it's something that you've brought up but not necessarily looked at, is the point of bringing these wages down and putting them on 7-year contracts that if they decide they're going to sell a player in 2 years' time, that they're not frozen out by being on Jadon Sancho's £300,000 a week. They're on £70,000 a week with massive performance-related bonuses, because that allows other teams of the next level, maybe below, to actually financially be a viable option for those players.
So it's a good point, but there is a counterpoint to it. And that is, unfortunately, that let's take, for example, Benoit Badiashile, who, by the way, I'm actually quite a big fan of. And I think that he is underrated, but he's just got lost in the shuffle. But let's just say that Badiashile, this time next year, he's just not really getting into the team still. Colwell's got the position nailed down. And Chelsea say, we should probably sell him. Okay, he's got a long time left on his deal. That means his value has been retained. Let's take him to market. And Badiashile sits there and goes, you know what? Football's a high-risk sport. I could break my leg tomorrow. I'm not going to go. And, Chelsea are the original story of the Bosman, of the Winston Bogard situation where you just wait out a contract. So what if one of these players just goes, you've promised me 7 years of wages in a sport where I can get injured tomorrow. I'm not going to go. And then what if that becomes a bit of a seedling idea for the others? So, Jack, you're right, but it does not come without its risks.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think another thing to maybe consider is that this strategy in terms of buying, selling, moving players on works really effectively in a pre-PSR era. I feel like look at the spending of clubs like Newcastle this summer, look at clubs even like Nottingham Forest being a little bit more sensible than they have in recent windows, look at the financial situation around Europe. The Premier League spending was way down on previous years this year. Saudi Arabia didn't have as bigger impact as many people expected them to.
I mean, Ligue 1 didn't spend anything because they didn't have a TV deal. Bundesliga down 20%, I think I saw.
It's not the market of 5 years ago. It's not the pre-pandemic, everyone can spend whatever they like, and financial fair play was a bit of a joke. I think people take PSR a lot more seriously than the previous iterations of financial fair play. So I just think Chelsea have the potential to have a lot of players that haven't worked out on their books that they can't shift, despite Jack's very well-made point about their wages. I just think it will be difficult to recoup the fees that they need to keep this business going.
Jack, any final thoughts before we close off?
Just one, I suppose, on that is that actually 5 clubs spent more net spend-wise than Chelsea in this transfer window. We saw Brighton spend £139 million, straight up, and they've just agreed an £11 million deal to bring in
Funded
Gomez.
by Caicedo, though.
Well, yeah, but to bring in Gomez from Inter Miami. Ipswich spent £104 million. Manchester United spent £94 million net. West Ham spent £84 million net, and Tottenham spent £83 million net. Chelsea, before they sold Angelo Gabriel, spent £72 million net, and that deal's around 20 million odd.
Yep.
So currently that brings them down to about 52, which puts them below Southampton and just a little bit above Leicester. Now, I could agree that they've obviously got windows in the past in a way that a lot of these other clubs don't. But there was kind of this talk that Chelsea, they're expecting a couple more to leave, that there might be more that go out to Belgium, to Turkey. Those windows are still open as we speak right now. If they get rid of a few more, they were kind of aiming at a net spend zero window.
They're not actually that far off.
And they're not miles off it. Is there something just to consider about that before? Because I feel like whilst a lot of these things are right, not to kind of address that as an option is probably a little bit untoward.
I have to give them some credit here. The list of players that we all thought would be, let's just go with stranded at the end of the window, it's a lot smaller than I actually thought it would be. Ben Chilwell is unfortunately sat there, and then depending on your classification of who's wanted and who's not, maybe like Cesare Casadei has been left stranded, potentially Chukwuemeka, I don't know where he stands, but almost everybody else is gone. And some of those trickled out later. Angelo Gabriel, as you say, Jack, moving over to Saudi Arabia, going to Al Nassr, and maybe a couple more. They did do a pretty good job of clearing their decks of those that they didn't want. Some of those players are players they've already signed and decided to move on from very quickly, which is perhaps an indictment of the process, perhaps not. They made a profit on Angelo Gabriel. He's never played a minute for Chelsea. They nearly made a profit on David Washington until they backed out of that one as well. All right, I think that's it. That's the sensible conversation about Chelsea's transfer. Nuance, balance and sensibility. Something that's been lacking all summer, but I think we've nailed it, guys. Thank you very much to Dougie.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much to Voice of God, Jack Collins.
Always a pleasure, Sam.
And thank you to you, dear listener. I'll see you same time next week.
Final seconds of the game, a chance to score, and the chance has gone begging. If your business's commerce platform keeps missing the target on golden opportunities, get the MVP you deserve. Get Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide. Whether you're a garage entrepreneur or IPO ready, Shopify is the only tool that you need to start, run, and grow your business without the struggle. Shopify puts you in control of every sales channel. So whether you're selling signed football boots from Shopify's in-person POS system, or you're vending vintage shirts on Shopify's all-in-one e-commerce platform, you are covered. And once you've reached your audience, Shopify has the internet's best converting checkout to help you turn them from browsers to buyers. What I love about Shopify is how, no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US. And Shopify is truly a global force, powering Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across over 170 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. This is Possibility, powered by Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ranks, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ranks to take your business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/ranks.